People with decades of experience delivering aid and life-saving assistance are saying Gaza is unlike anything they've ever seen or dealt with before. The combination of factors is astounding, they say. Bombs raining down on their workers, aid trucks being turned back arbitrarily, roads connecting the north and the south completely destroyed, the needs outweighing what is being delivered by a lot. But we don't exactly know how much, because it's too dangerous to make accurate on-the-ground assessments. This is the situation right now in Gaza for NGOs who are trying to do life-saving work, but are themselves being targeted and killed, with more than 254 aid workers killed so far since October 7, and counting. By some accounts, Gaza needs at least 20 years to start going back to normal, although it's questionable whether the generations that have witnessed this ongoing war are ever going to be the same again, one Ghazan told me. This is Beyond the Headlines, and I'm your host, Nada Al-Tahir. This week, I traveled to Jordan to attend an emergency humanitarian conference for Gaza on the shores of the Dead Sea to delve deeper into the complexities of this mission.
Humanitarian access cannot wait for a ceasefire and cannot be subject to the political agendas of any party. My friends, we cannot abandon Gaza. It should be everyone's priority because history will judge us by our actions. It is a test of our humanity and sincerity. Thank you very much.
That was Jordan's King Abdullah's impassioned speech at the beginning of the conference, which brought together more than 60 heads of states and nearly 70 organizations that work on the ground to discuss the needs in Gaza. In March, the Palestinian cabinet was reshuffled and a new government was sworn in. One of these ministers is Bassel Nasser, a Gazan himself and veteran UN worker with more than 21 years at the UN Development Program. His own homes were destroyed during the war. He is now Palestine's Minister of Relief Affairs, a new position that was created in light of the war in Gaza. I spoke to him about the ministry's new role and the importance of such high-level meetings like the one in Jordan.
The Ministry of Relief Affairs was established at this government due to the ongoing war on the Gaza Strip and the resulting deaths that are unprecedented, actually. So there was a need to have a portfolio that focuses on the relief and humanitarian assistance and early recovery and the Gaza Strip. And the main functions of the ministry is to coordinate the efforts between the government, the national organizations, UN agencies, local organizations, to develop plans for relief, early recovery, facilitation tasks, advocacy, mobilizing resources, etc.
So you've seen the different wars. You've been through the different wars as a Gazan, as a Palestinian, Kaman as someone in the UN who is part of this humanitarian. But you have a very unique perspective on this. How is this war different? How are the needs different? And how are the challenges different?
Yeah, was in Gaza, the situation is more complex and complicated. In Gaza, the main challenge is again financial, because some estimates of the relief and recovery and reconstruction exceed $30 billion. And to be able to deliver relief and recovery and reconstruction services and activities, the money should be available. The second challenge is the siege imposed in Gaza, because if you want to do recovery and reconstruction and also humanitarian assistance activities efficiently and effectively, you need to have free access of goods and people. You cannot deliver sufficiently and properly while the siege is imposed on the Gaza Strip, and there are very difficult, level of access of people and goods. And the third challenge is withdrawal or occupation or reoccupation of the Gaza Strip, because Israel should withdraw completely from the Gaza Strip in order to be able to deliver services and implement the projects and activities. Fourth challenge is related to the governmental capacities and presence in the Gaza Strip. If the Palestinian government is not empowered and supported to rule the Gaza Strip fully, we will not be able to deliver services and carry out recovery and reconstruction activities. And the fourth challenge is related to the implementation capacities of the international and local organizations, the Palestinian private sector, contracting, etc. Because the magnitude of works of recovery and reconstruction is huge.
But before reconstruction can actually begin, it's important to remember that it's not square one. It's not a barren land or an empty ground that we're dealing with. It's land that's been decimated with body parts everywhere, even enmeshed in the rubble itself. The rubble which has nowhere to go, even if it was all cleared. It needs heavy machinery and free access of it in and out of the enclave, which even before October 7 has been under siege for more than a decade. Plus, there are people who have yet to see the fruits of the reconstruction efforts of the 2014 war. So the work is difficult and slow. Minister Basil elaborates.
Yeah, well, actually, in parallel, we need to provide transitional shelter to people who lost their homes around, or more than actually now, more than 1 million people without having shelter or home to live in. So we must work on providing temporary shelters, and this temporary shelter should not be tents. We are against having people stay in tents for many years to come. We are using the concept of prefabs and establishing, we are calling them transitional communities, 50, 60, 70 transitional communities in the Gaza Strip. And each community will have between 1,000 to 2,000 families. And each community will be having its health facilities, educational facilities, schools, kindergarten, shopping corner, green areas, and also need to be connected with electricity and water networks, and having an internal solid waste management system.
One of the key points that was being addressed at the conference was the delivery of humanitarian aid and the extreme challenges being faced with Israel's takeover of the border with Egypt and Rafah, the overcrowding of so-called safe zones, and people's continuous displacement. About that, I've spoken to Samah Hadid, head of advocacy, media, and communications for the MENA region at the Norwegian Refugee Council, who explained how aid workers can't find safe zones to operate and how restrictions on aid items, including medical supplies and sleeping bags, exacerbate the humanitarian crisis and delay aid deliveries. I asked her about how the NRC's work in Gaza is different from the emergency response that they've previously done in other countries.
We're providing non-food items, supporting displaced communities in Gaza as much as possible, trying to ensure that people have what they need during their displacement. But it is incredibly difficult right now to provide aid. Everywhere is overcrowded. People have been displaced multiple times and just cannot continue to flee from one place to another. And there's absolutely no safety. There's no such thing as a safe zone in Gaza right now. Our colleagues are telling us that bombardment and insecurity is absolutely everywhere. So providing aid in Gaza is virtually impossible right now. But we, with our colleagues on the ground, we're trying to do as much as we can. But what is very clear now that we're over 8 months into this catastrophe is a ceasefire is needed, because aid workers on the ground need safety to provide aid, and people receiving aid also need safety. They cannot do this under constant bombardment. So this is the main call from the humanitarian community. We've been shouting for this for months now.
How important is it that aid is allowed in? Because there are thousands of trucks on the border. But from what I've had conversations with humanitarian groups, what they have told me is that the rules and restrictions are arbitrary, and that the lists that are being created by the NGOs are based on experience. They're not based on any official kind of information that COVAX is issuing. So what kind of items have been returned, and what is your experience as NRC when it comes to bringing aid in?
The items that have been rejected by the Israeli government are completely arbitrary. There's an arbitrary list, and this is also a deliberate restriction of aid that we've been seeing over the past few months now. It means that medical items, even sleeping bags, other critical supplies have been rejected by the Israeli authorities on an ad hoc basis, giving no legitimate reason. And we've had the experience of our trucks having to wait for weeks sometimes to enter. And by the time the items enter, the situation on the ground has changed. It's too late to distribute. It's also very unsafe to distribute aid once the trucks actually make it into Gaza. So we need the Israeli government to stop this deliberate restriction of aid. It has resulted in the civilian population being denied life-saving support and being starved. And we're seeing already the results of that with civilians dying from a lack of food and nutrition and health support.
And the people who have died as a consequence of war, in the sense of being denied food, medical services, they're not being put in the official tally of people who have been directly killed by the bombardment. So what is your estimate as to how much worse is the reality than the numbers are telling us?
The reality is much, much worse than the numbers are telling us, because it's really difficult to do thorough assessments to assess the impact of the conflict because the bombs are still raining down. And so aid workers can't do the assessments and gather the information that they need. But the information that is coming out gives you a picture of just the catastrophe. It's the tip of the iceberg. And I believe what's being reported is an underestimate of the suffering in Gaza right now. And the reality on the ground is much, much worse.
While planning for the reconstruction of Gaza and ensuring the provision of aid and shelters is critical, it is equally important to consider the daily struggles of those trying to survive amidst the conflict. I've spoken to Federico Dessi, who is the Middle East Regional Director for Handicap International, a France-based NGO working with people with disabilities. I asked him about his recent visit to Gaza, where his organization provides support, and the dangers that he and his workers faced when serving on the ground. Federico lost a colleague, Muna, who was killed with her entire family on June 8, and she is not the first employee that Handicap International has lost to the war.
So I was based in Rafah at that time because that was the main area of operation for us. I also went to Deir al-Balah and the coast of Khan Yunis. So I saw a lot of people, everywhere was crowded, thousands of tents along the coast where people were cramped. I visited a shelter, one of the UNRWA schools that was turned into a shelter with around 4,000, 5,000 displaced persons. It was packed with people. In every classroom there were several families. And all over people were waiting to know what would happen to them because they were expecting a potential offensive into Rafah that eventually happened after I left.
And have you been to other war zones? How does this one compare?
I think this is the most intense war zone I visited in my career. I've been working for 18 years in the humanitarian sector. I've been to Raqqa just a few months after the offensive against the Islamic State there. I've been in Iraq in 2015, 2016 when there was the battle against the Islamic State. I've been in Congo, in Africa several years ago, again in an area where they were fighting with the rebels. But this is really so intense. So many people have been killed, so many buildings have been destroyed in such a tiny speck of land that is unthinkable.
What do you remember from your visit there? Is there anything that kind of stayed with you afterwards?
I was impressed by the strength of will of some of my colleagues. After 6 months being there, now 8 months, they're still trying to help and support the other people who are even worse off than them. We have not been able to work in Gaza City until now because the area was heavily damaged and depopulated at the beginning of the war, but we still have a couple of staff and some field workers there. We're trying to reactivate them, and the colleagues that are in the middle area in Deir al-Balah, they're thinking of how can we get there and help them and bring them supplies while themselves are, in danger and in need. So that's really impressive. The way the Palestinians are reacting, and especially the aid workers are doing their best to help themselves and help the other ones.
That's it for today. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Headlines. This episode was produced by Arthur Edison and Dua Farid, and I've been your host, Nada Al-Tahir, coming to you from Jordan.